Well, I'm sure it's going to get faster when I'm more familiar with it. Before I went camping out in the wilds with this Mountainsmith 6-man tent, possibly in a rainstorm or snowstorm or even wind, or if it's simply dark and cold, I wanted to see how hard or how much time it would take to put it up and take it down while the weather was lovely and dry. This is a run-through of what it took me to do it for the first time. In short, getting it all set up for the first time took me a total of 26 minutes. Think about what 26 minutes would be like if you were doing it for the first time during inclement weather, right? Now that I know how it goes together, I'm sure I could get it down to 10 or 15 minutes next time. Some of the steps with the Mountainsmith were fairly obvious if you've owned a tent in the past 10 years, and I've owned about 6 of them in that time span. You got the typical fiberglass cross over the top poles that you assemble into 2 long poles, and then you slide them through the connectors on the top of the tent and locate the loops to loop them through so that the long poles crisscross over the top of the tent. Now, it wasn't immediately obvious here, after stretching out the material, which part would become the front of the tent, and even which part was the Rainfly and which was the tent. Not until I got them both stretched out on the ground and referred back to the photo on the box. One tip, the heavier material is the tent itself, with the heaviest part of that being the tent's bottom. Then you find the 4 corner pockets to stick each of the poles tips into the bathtub base of the tent. Then, as you can see, the act of sticking all of the assembled fiberglass poles into those corner pockets creates enough tension that it causes the tent to pop up, and you can see the basic form of the tent. If you haven't already done so, make sure the next step is putting stakes in the ground on the 4 corners so the tent doesn't blow away while you finish assembling. If you're already at the campsite and it's not raining, and if you are there with family or group, then you can go ahead and have the crew set up, start putting stuff into the tent at this point while you get the Rainfly in place. A process that I found a little less intuitive. And if you know for sure that you've got clear skies all night, well, then you're essentially done right here. Just skip the Rainfly and enjoy the stars and moons, since the top middle of the tent has a window open to the sky, which is going to be covered, of course, if you've got the Rainfly up. The next step is getting the Rainfly draped over and attached to the corners, and this takes a lot of effort. And it would be particularly if it's windy and you're working alone, as I know from experience. Fortunately, during this test assembly, I had virtually no wind at all to contend with, so draping it over without help took little time at all. One of the selling points of this tent for me was its built-in vestibule, that extra triangle of material you see that extends beyond the front. If you've done any camping in bad weather, you'll understand why this is a valuable bonus feature. Trying to get in and out of that door in the middle of the night to go pee or whatever when it's raining eventually gets rain in the tent, and usually making it all too easy to track mud in when you return to it. With the vestibule, you can not only keep a few things outside the tent if you wish, but you can also have a shoe mat, like a carpet sample or whatever, so that everyone can take off their shoes where it's dry before they even get in the tent, keeping the inside of your tent much cleaner throughout the camping trip. However, I struggled to get that vestibule part positioned and staked down. There's quite a bit of tension, and it was enough tension that I found myself going back to the visual instructions to see if I was doing something wrong, but it doesn't appear that I was. It's just a snug fit. I also didn't find any kind of loop on the inside when I wanted to roll up the vestibule opening to get more of a breeze inside. Maybe it was human error, me just not finding it. I don't know, but it would sure be useful to have that inside tie to open it up all the way on a hot night, huh? Anyway, there you go. Took 26 minutes this first time getting it assembled. So here's the finished result, how it looks from the outside, with everything closed up as it would be if the weather wasn't favorable. It's got 3 windows that appear to be a very secure fit, a little strip of Velcro holding rain flat material in place securely enough to keep the rain from blowing in if it's blustery, and yet it zips open easily with just one hand, as you can see. As you can also see, there are a couple of extra places for tying the tent down that I did not secure on this test, so add a few more minutes to your assembly time total for that. I'm talking about these yellow strings you see hanging down from about 4 feet up. When there's higher wind gusts, you'll definitely want those in place to keep the tent from buffeting or even collapsing, as happened once with a different tent when I was camping on an extremely gusty night. As you can see, I did finally figure out how to get the door flap of the vestibule to stay up, making the entry and exit much easier, although I would keep it down if it were a cold night for extra insulation. Now let's go check out the inside. But there you go, a spacious inside with 3 big windows for ventilation. And if you are as tall as me, I'm 6'0", you can see there's plenty of ceiling space, enough to stand tall and straight, and not just in the very center, but about 3 feet out on either side of the center. Here, however, you can see one thing that I consider less than ideal, although I would call it a trade-off. The problem is you cannot close these windows from the inside, as you can on many other tents, because the zipper for the window coverings are outside of the screens, outside the tent. Here's what I mean by a trade-off. Nearly every tent I've ever owned, where I can zip the windows open or shut from the inside, they are prone to leak in a rainstorm right along those seams. I have now camped in this tent probably 20 times, including times when it was in fact a massive rainstorm or times of extremely high wind gusts, up to 35 miles per hour in fact. and I stayed perfectly dry in spite of that. The trade-off of those outside zippers is that you've got the windows open for a breeze at night, probably, but what happens when it starts raining? You're going to go outside the tent to zip up each one of those 3 windows. But if it makes it more rainproof, well, that's a trade-off I'm willing to take. Here's the process for taking it down. Predictably, it goes much faster. And since this is essentially the reverse of what you've already learned how to do, putting it up, you're not going to need instructions for dismantling. That said, I do wish there was a little more room in the duffel bag that it came with. It's nice that it is possible to compact the tent down to this tiny little size, but I found it nearly impossible to cram everything back into its original size. But there you have it, my initial review and assembly and disassembly of the Mountainsmith 6-man tent, which has proven to be the most durable large tent I have ever owned. If you found this helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up or a like, depending on the platform, and subscribing for more videos like this.